April 18, 1992. For months, Japan believed the United States was too far away to strike. After the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan had expanded across the Pacific at an incredible speed. Their navy controlled huge territories. Their soldiers were winning battle after battle. Leaders in Tokyo believed America was shocked, weakened, and unable to respond. That thousands of miles away, inside the United States, a secret plan was already moving forward, a plan that seemed almost impossible. A small group of American bombers would take off from an aircraft carrier in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, fly farther than anyone expected, and strike the heart of Japan itself. The mission was not designed to destroy Japan's military. It was not designed to win the war. It was designed to send a message that said, America is coming. And when 60 American bombers appeared in the skies over Japan, they did something that shocked Japanese leadership. They forced an empire to completely rethink its war strategy. This is the story of the Doolittle Raid, the mission that changed the psychology of World War II. Chapter 1, Japan's moment of domination. At the beginning of 1942, Japan looked unstoppable. Just months earlier, on December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack destroyed or damaged many American ships and killed thousands of people. Japan expected the United States to lose confidence. Japanese military leaders believed America would negotiate. They believed Americans lacked the will for a long war. But they misunderstood one important thing. They underestimated American determination. Instead of surrendering, the United States began preparing for a massive response. Factories across America started producing aircraft, ships, tanks, and weapons at an unbelievable speed. But American leaders knew they needed something more than production. They needed a psychological victory. The American people needed proof that Japan could be attacked, because at that moment Japan seemed untouchable. The distance between Hawaii and Japan was enormous. The Japanese homeland had never been attacked by an enemy force in modern history. The idea that American bombers could reach Japanese cities seemed impossible, until one man proposed a dangerous idea. His name was Lieutenant Colonel James Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle was already famous in aviation. He was an experienced pilot, engineer, and military officer. But his new mission would become one of the riskiest operations in American military history. Chapter 2, The Impossible Mission. The problem was simple. American bombers could not fly from normal bases close enough to Japan. The solution? Launch them from an aircraft carrier. But there was a huge problem. The bombers used by the Army Air Forces were not designed for carrier operations. They were too large. They were too heavy. They needed long runways. An aircraft carrier runway was tiny compared to a normal airfield. Landing was impossible. So the plan changed. The bombers would take off from the carrier. They would attack Japan. Then they would continue toward China, where they were expected to land at friendly airfields. There would be no return journey. Every crew member knew this was likely a one-way mission. The aircraft chosen was the B-55 Mitchell bomber. It was modified to reduce weight. Extra equipment was removed. Fuel tanks were adjusted. Every count mattered. The crews trained again and again. They practiced short takeoffs. They practiced flying low. They practiced navigation. They knew the mission was dangerous. But they also knew history was watching. Chapter 3, The Secret Journey Across the Pacific. On April 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Hornet left California. Hidden on its deck were 16 D-55 bombers. The ship sailed silently across the Pacific. The mission was so secret that many sailors did not even know what was happening. The bombers were covered. The crews waited. The destination, Japan. For days, the task force moved through the ocean. The plan depended on surprise. If Japan detected them too early, fighter aircraft and defenses could destroy the bombers before they reached their target. But on April 18, everything changed. American ships discovered a Japanese patrol boat. The enemy had spotted them. The Americans were still hundreds of miles away from the planned launch point. They had a decision to make. Continue forward and risk discovery, or launch immediately. The commander made the choice. Launch the bombers. The crew was prepared. The weather was rough. The ocean waves were huge. The carrier was moving. The runway was short. One by one, the B-125 bombers rolled forward. The first aircraft lifted into the sky. Then another. Then another. 16 aircraft. 16 crews. The mission that many believed could never happen. A mission that many believed could never happen. They were now flying toward Japan. Chapter 4, The Shock Over Tokyo. The Japanese leadership believed their homeland was safe. They had defenses. They had radar. They had fighter planes. But nobody expected American bombers to appear that day. The D-96 approached Japan. Some civilians looked up and saw aircraft in the sky. At first, many believed they were Japanese planes. Then they realized something was wrong. These aircraft had American markings. The impossible was happening. America was attacking Japan. The bombers targeted several cities, including Tokyo, Yokohama, Togi, and Nagoya. The physical damage was limited. The raid did not destroy major military factories. It did not cripple Japan's war machine. But the psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, Japanese citizens experienced the fear of an attack on their own homeland. The empire that had brought war across Asia suddenly realized the war had come back to them. Chapter 5. Japan realizes it is not invincible. The Doolittle Raid lasted only a short time. The bombs caused limited destruction compared to later bombing campaigns. But the impact was much bigger than the physical damage. Inside Japan's military leadership, the reaction was immediate. For months, Japan had believed its homeland was protected by distance. The Pacific Ocean was their shield. Their navy was powerful. Their enemies were far away. But on April 18, 1942, that belief collapsed. American aircraft had reached Tokyo. The capital of the Japanese Empire had been attacked, and nobody knew how it happened. Japanese commanders were shocked. How did American bombers get so close? Where did they come from? How could the Imperial Japanese Navy fail to detect them? The raid created something Japan had not experienced since the beginning of the war: fear. Chapter 6. The search for the answer. Japanese leaders immediately started investigating. They knew the attack could not be ignored. If America could do this once, they could do it again. The military began increasing defenses around major cities. Anti-aircraft guns were moved. Fighter aircraft were repositioned. More resources were assigned to homeland protection. This was a major problem for Japan. Every aircraft protecting Japan was an aircraft not fighting overseas. Every ship guarding the homeland was a ship not supporting expansion across the Pacific. The raid forced Japan to divide its strength. And in war, dividing resources can be deadly. The Americans had achieved something strategic. With only 16 bombers, they forced Japan to rethink its priorities. Chapter 7. Admiral Yamamoto's worry. One of the most important figures watching the situation was Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Yamamoto was the commander of the Japanese combined fleet. He was the mastermind behind the attack on Pearl Harbor. Unlike some Japanese leaders, Yamamoto understood America's industrial power. He had studied in the United States. He knew American factories could produce ships and aircraft on a scale Japan could not match. He reportedly warned that Japan could dominate for a limited time, but would struggle in a long war. The Doolittle Raid proved something important. The United States was not broken. It was fighting back. Yamamoto knew Japan needed to achieve victory quickly. A long war would favor America. The raid increased pressure on Japanese commanders to act. They needed another major victory, something that would eliminate American naval power in the Pacific. That idea would lead to one of the most important battles in history, the Battle of Midway. Chapter 8. The connection to Midway. After Pearl Harbor, Japan had a powerful navy. The Japanese Navy believed it could control the Pacific. But the Doolittle Raid exposed a weakness. Japan could win battles far from home, but it could not completely protect its own territory. Japanese leaders became convinced that they needed to destroy the remaining American aircraft carriers. Without those carriers, they believed America would struggle to fight back. The plan was simple: force the American fleet into a trap, destroy it, secure Japanese dominance. The target was Midway Atoll, a small island in the Pacific. The Japanese believed capturing Midway would expand their defensive perimeter and lure American carriers into battle. But the Americans had a secret advantage. They had broken Japanese naval codes. They knew Japan was coming. The confidence created after Pearl Harbor was about to meet a completely different reality. Chapter 9. The price Japan paid for underestimating America. The Doolittle Raid did not sink battleships. It did not destroy armies. It did not directly change the balance of military power. But wars are not only fought with weapons. They are fought with information, confidence, and decisions. The raid damaged Japan's belief that it could control the Pacific without consequences. The Japanese military had assumed America would take years to recover. They were wrong. America was already striking back. The mission also gave Americans a powerful symbol. The country had suffered a painful attack at Pearl Harbor. Now people had proof Japan could be reached. The American newspapers celebrated the mission. The pilots became heroes. Jimmy Doolittle received the Medal of Honor. The raid became a symbol of American courage. Chapter 10. The fate of the raiders. The mission was extremely dangerous. After attacking Japan, the bombers had to fly toward China. But because they launched earlier than planned, fuel became a major problem. Many aircraft ran out of fuel before reaching their destinations. Some crashed. Some crews landed in areas controlled by Japan. Several American airmen were captured. The mission had a heavy cost, but every crew member understood the risk before taking off. They knew they might not return. Their goal was bigger than survival. They wanted Japan to know America was fighting back. Chapter 11. The Japanese response. After the raid, the Japanese response was harsh. In areas of China where American crews received help, Japanese forces carried out brutal retaliation. Villages were attacked. Thousands of civilians suffered. Japan wanted to punish anyone who assisted the American airmen. But instead of creating fear, the response revealed something else. The war was becoming larger. The conflict was no longer limited to distant battlefields. It was affecting entire populations. Chapter 12. Why 16 bombers mattered so much. History often remembers battles by numbers. Thousands of tanks, hundreds of ships, millions of soldiers. But sometimes a small event changes everything. The Doolittle Raid involved only 16 bombers, 18 crew members, one mission, yet its consequences were enormous. It forced Japan to waste resources defending its homeland. It increased pressure for the Midway operation. It boosted American morale. And most importantly, it destroyed the idea that Japan was untouchable. Chapter 18. The beginning of Japan's turning point. Before April 18, 1842, Japan was expanding. After April 18, Japan started worrying about defense. That psychological shift mattered. The empire that began the war with confidence started reacting to American moves. The Doolittle Raid did not win World War II, but it changed the direction of the war. A few weeks later, Japan would face America at Midway, and the result would shock the world. 4 Japanese aircraft carriers would be destroyed. The balance of power in the Pacific would begin to change. The small raid that seemed like a desperate gamble became the first sign that Japan's momentum was ending. The Doolittle Raiders flew only one mission. They dropped only a small number of bombs. But those 16 aircraft created a chain reaction that changed the Pacific War forever. Because sometimes the biggest victories are not measured by destruction. They are measured by the decisions they force the enemy to make. And Japan's next decision would lead to one of the greatest naval disasters in history. Chapter 14. Japan's final gamble. After the Doolittle Raid, Japanese leaders faced a serious problem. They had achieved incredible victories across the Pacific. They had attacked Pearl Harbor. They had captured territories across Southeast Asia. They had defeated powerful opponents, but now there was a new reality. America was still standing. And worse for Japan, America reached Japanese soil. The raid created a fear among Japanese commanders. What if American bombers returned? What if future attacks became larger? What if Japan could no longer control the Pacific? Admiral Yamamoto believed Japan needed to force a decisive battle. A battle where Japan could destroy the American carrier fleet. If Japan succeeded, it could possibly force the United States to negotiate. The target, Midway Island. Chapter 15. The Battle of Midway begins in June 1942. Japan launched one of its biggest naval operations. The Japanese fleet moved toward Midway with hundreds of aircraft and powerful warships. Their plan was carefully designed. They'd expected the Americans to react exactly how they wanted, but Japan did not know something important. American intelligence had already discovered the plan. The United States knew Japan was coming. This gave America something extremely valuable: preparation. The American commanders knew where the Japanese fleet would be. They knew an attack was coming, and they prepared a trap of their own. Chapter 16. The moment that changed the Pacific War. The Battle of Midway became one of the most important naval battles in history. American aircraft attacked the Japanese carriers. The timing was devastating. Japanese aircraft were preparing for another attack. Planes were being moved. Fuel and weapons were being handled on the carrier decks. Then American bombs struck. In a short period of time, Japan lost 4 major aircraft carriers. Akadikada, Soryu, Hiryu. These were not ordinary ships. They were the heart of Japanese naval power. Experienced pilots were lost. The offensive power Japan had built over years was damaged. The balance of the Pacific had changed. Before Midway, Japan was expanding. After Midway, Japan was defending. Chapter 17. The dubious connection between the raid and Midway. The Doolittle Raid did not directly cause Midway, but it influenced Japanese thinking. The raid increased pressure on Japan to protect its homeland. It convinced leaders that American carriers were a serious threat. It pushed Japan toward aggressive decisions. The fear created by those 16 bombers helped shape the mindset behind the next major move. In war, decisions are often influenced by psychology. The Doolittle Raid was a psychological attack as much as a military one. It forced Japan to react. Chapter 18. What happened to Jimmy Doolittle? After returning to the United States, Jimmy Doolittle became a national hero, but he personally believed the mission had failed. He thought losing the aircraft and crews meant he had disappointed his country. He did not realize the impact of what he had accomplished. President Franklin D. Roosevelt awarded him the Medal of Honor. The mission became legendary. Doolittle continued serving during World War II, and later became one of America's most respected military leaders. But he always remembered the men who flew with him. The success of the raid was not about one person. It was about every pilot and crew member who took off knowing they might never come home. Chapter 19. The raiders who survived. The 80 men who participated in the mission became known as the Doolittle Raiders. Their stories were different. Some escaped through China with help from local civilians. Some were captured by Japanese forces. Several prisoners suffered terrible conditions. 3 American airmen were executed by Japan after being captured. Others spent years as prisoners of war. But every one of them became part of one of the most famous missions in military history. They were ordinary men who accepted an extraordinary risk. Chapter 20. Why the raid mattered to America in early 1942. Americans needed hope. Pearl Harbor had been a national shock. The United States had entered the war under painful circumstances. The Doolittle Raid changed the mood of the country. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, Americans had a victory they could celebrate. The message was clear: America could fight back. The enemy was not invincible. The war would be long. The sacrifices would be enormous. But victory was possible. Chapter 21. The bigger lesson of the Doolittle Raid. The Doolittle Raid teaches something important about warfare. A small force can create a huge impact. The mission was not successful because it destroyed Japan's military. It was successful because it changed decisions. Japan was forced to spend resources protecting itself. Japan became more cautious. Japan made strategic choices based on fear of future attacks. That is the power of a psychological victory. Chapter 21. The silent legacy of the 16 bombers today. The Doolittle Raid remains one of the most famous operations of World War II. Not because it was the biggest bombing mission, not because it caused the most destruction, but because it represented something larger. It was the moment when America told Japan, "You can attack us, but you cannot hide from us." 16 bombers crossed an ocean. They entered enemy airspace. They completed a mission many thought was impossible. And when they disappeared into the Pacific skies, they left behind something more powerful than bombs. They left behind confidence. Confidence that Japan could be defeated. The Doolittle Raid was only a few hours long, but its effects lasted for years. A handful of aircraft changed the emotions of 2 nations. One side realized the war would be harder than expected. The other side realized victory was possible. The mission did not end World War II, but it helped begin the turning point. Because sometimes history does not change with the biggest army or the strongest weapons. Sometimes history changes when a smaller group of people decide to attempt the impossible. And in 1942, 16 American bombers did exactly that. They changed Japan's entire war plan. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more incredible history documentaries and untold stories from the past.